Hi friends, Nick here from the Cloud Architects podcast. We need your help to grow the channel, so without making this sound cheesier than it needs to, please help us by hitting the like, subscribe, and notification bell icon. That way, more people see our channel and we get to make more interesting episodes more often.
Welcome to another episode of the Cloud Architects podcast. Day 3 here at Ignite in Chicago. We are not enjoying the cold outside.
True there.
You may also hear some background noise everywhere. We've been running around finding spots to record. Hugely grateful to eNow Software for helping us out with the spot that we're in right now.
That's right.
So literally the episode is brought to you by them, because without them there would be no episode this time.
That's right. And with no cheese intended, Chris, if it wasn't for the kind folks at eNow Software, we would not been able to record. So big shout out to them and thank you for your kindness.
Yes. And as I said, it's really cold here in Chicago, white snow outside, but someone who's not at all.
No.
You know a little bit about snow, don't you?
A little bit, yeah.
Yes. Also no stranger to the podcast,
That's right.
Antonio. So welcome to the show, Antonio Maio.
Thank you.
It has been a little while.
So it has been a minute, so to speak.
Just looking at the record of all things Cloud Architect, it would have been Ignite 2018 that we last recorded.
Yep.
Obviously, we've seen each other heaps since.
We have.
It's always great when we bump into each other at events. A lot of folks probably don't know that Antonio and I first met in Dallas. We're both sort of adopted Texans, I guess.
That's right.
Oh, wow.
That's right.
So we were both living in Texas just temporarily, and we met at a conference there in 2014. So it's been a decade.
We had just moved. I think we had each just moved there a month or a couple months before.
That's right.
Yeah.
So always the highlight of any trip or conference when I get to bump into you. So thank you.
Always great to see you guys.
Yeah, thank you for giving us your time. Last time we spoke about governance and compliance and all of that type of stuff.
It was a great episode.
Yes.
And it was a foundational episode because where, if I may say, a lot of IT folks struggle with that thing of how do we do what we do and at the same time respect the fact that we shouldn't be running with scissors, and what does that actually mean on a Monday morning, right?
Yes.
And this governance thing is this thing that comes from the business, and if we're not compliant to this thing, then somebody who pays the check gets a free orange jumpsuit and some free bracelets, right? in the extreme.
Yes.
And so since then, we've moved on, and obviously there's I don't want to say the words a mad froth, but a lot of hype around AI.
Yeah.
And this event that we're in is wall-to-wall Copilot. And we've seen maybe even a little, not apathy, but a little bit of exhaustion from customers going, oh, it's another Copilot thing. And also a desire to want to use it meaningfully.
Yes.
This week, you've had the pleasure of following Satya right after the keynote.
That's right.
And we're going to steal the session title that you've had for this show.
Okay.
Do you want to tell us about what you talked about and also the impact of following Satya Nadella right after keynote?
Okay. Well, first I wanted to thank you both for having me on the podcast again. I clearly remember our last episode, and it was great fun.
Yeah.
It was great to hang out with you guys and record that episode. So I felt very honored when you asked me to be on again.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I did give a theater session here on Tuesday, immediately after Satya's keynote. I think the keynote ended at 11. I was on 11:15, something like that.
No pressure.
Yeah, none. I was in the theater that I was in was right as everyone came in. So I think I benefited from that because there was an enormous crowd, larger than I think I've ever had. There must have been 500 people there standing around and sitting, almost every seat full. And the topic was real-world enterprise deployments of Microsoft Copilot.
Yeah.
And
is that even possible?
It is. It is possible. We have worked on several. Copilot is still new for a lot of people. A lot of people still figuring it out or figuring out how they can best benefit from AI. What are the right use cases to focus on when the organization needs it? Those are still open questions for a lot of people. But that was the topic. And we had all of 12 minutes, right?
Yeah.
So what are you going to share in 12 minutes? It's more like a TED Talk than a presentation. It's more like a performance than a presentation. So you kind of have to approach it from that perspective and just be really crisp on what you want to talk about.
How were the nerves?
Nervous, very nervous. That was, it went great. It went fine.
Yeah.
And I hope the people that attended got something out of it. It was really kind of 3 topics that I was trying to hit. And it was mostly around preparing for Copilot, preparing your organization for Copilot. The first topic was really about how do you assess your environment at scale? And, the company I work for, we work on both small client environments and very large client environments, both, small businesses and not as much small, say medium sized businesses to very large enterprises. And I like working on big environments because you run into problems that you don't with smaller ones, right? Yeah. So how do you assess your environment at scale? That was one topic I wanted to touch on. The second was rolling out security and data protection tools in order to protect your information, and also communicate how does Copilot, specifically M365 Copilot or Copilot for Microsoft 365, how does it work with your information? So how do you assess, who has access to your information and what kind of information you're storing, how long you're retaining it for, how old all those things. How do you assess that? And then how do you roll out the right data protection controls for it? And then the third was, of course, the change management aspect of it. How do you educate everyone in your organization so that they are getting the most out of Copilot right out of the gate? So those are kind of the 3 topics I wanted to hit in 12 minutes.
Wow.
Well, we'll give you a little bit more time than 12 minutes on the show, right? Because I think those are very important topics, because it's almost become a bit of a buzzword now that we go, forget about Copilot, get your data estate in order, right?
Yes.
But we don't really explain what that means, right?
Well, we've had several shows on this,
We have, right?
And the folks are really good at saying, don't run with scissors and prepare. And you're quite right. But how do we prepare?
Yeah. And so I think it's really important for someone or for folks to have a breakdown like that, to say, and the data side of it is only one side of it. I love that you kind of bring in the change management part of that, because again, it's a big change to the way folks work, right? Yeah. If you're like me, you don't always like change so much. You're set in your ways. You like doing things the way you do them. Yeah. And when something new, even if it's revolutionary and it comes along, it's nice to have that sort of a guidance as to like how best to adopt that. Yeah.
Is there a best to adopt?
So I think everyone's figuring it out. That's the thing. And I think it's important to recognize that Microsoft has published some great material on adoption, communication, help, lots on prompting. And it's important to educate everybody on. I think everyone is figuring out what is the right path for them.
Yeah.
One of the key points I was trying to make was, and it was a friend of mine that kind of said this to me, you have to encourage everybody to build a relationship with Copilot. And that kind of changed how I thought of it, where I'm going to use it differently than you are. And I just need to practice it. And I need to try some things and see what it brings back and make some adjustments and try it again. And just see, how do I, in what circumstances do I use it? What use cases do I use it for? How do I word my prompts? How do I point it at certain information so that it's most useful for me personally? And I think that's the most appropriate way to approach it.
That's a very interesting analogy. It's very close to being an emotional construct. Even.
Almost. Yeah. And I use the example, think of it as your own personal chief of staff or your own personal assistant that's there just help you be more productive in your work life and just try things with it.
Yeah. I like that, because I think we do get emotional about the technology that we use, right? Yeah. People have, this sort of emotional loyalty towards the systems and the things that they like.
That's true.
We'll pick on Warren because he's not here today, but he is Mac. Warren loves his Mac and his Apple stuff, but he also loves open source software, right? Okay. And it's an emotional thing for him, right? So I really like that. I've never heard anyone sort of frame it quite like that before. Yeah. And I think that's also where we differ from traditional change in a way that, when we roll out OneDrive, we say to our user audience, these are the things that you can do with OneDrive. This is how we want you to operate with this tool.
Yeah.
But I like what you said, because I think everyone's going to use Copilot in a slightly different way.
That's right.
And
if they use it.
If they use it at all, right? And some folks are going to be quicker to adopt than other folks as well, right? So,
and it's a little bit like when the world went Teams, and we saw all the usage data for IM spike in month one. And then chopped off.
Yeah.
Because, well, we were used to email, and why should I change? And why is it useful for me?
Yeah.
So since we're talking about emotions, how do you bridge that emotional gap for a user to say, what's in it for me? I know how to use my tools.
Yeah.
How could my life get better?
So one way to do that is, of course, sharing use cases, sharing scenarios you could potentially use it for, examples. And I think Microsoft has shared a lot of those, and the ones that people share within their organizations often follow what Microsoft has published, right? Summarize my emails for me because I've been away on vacation, and what are the top 10 emails I need to reply to? Okay. Summarize this meeting because I couldn't attend it and I just want to read the summary. What were the action items, kind of thing. Those great use cases. But I don't read every meeting summary. I'm in so many meetings every week. Right? Yes, sometimes I use it to summarize my email, but not all the time. So I think what we found was helpful for people was give two things. Give everyone in the organization a place where they can share what works for them. Right? And so we just have it's going to sound ridiculous and rudimentary, but in our organization, we have a very long running Teams thread that people just add stuff to. Yeah, I tried this and this worked and this is what I got out of it. This other thing didn't quite work. And it's just a long running thread. That has been good. And there's other ways you could do that. You could use a OneNote notebook. You could use a Teams conversation, all of those kinds of things. So someplace where people can share what works and what doesn't work, because people learn from that and they go try it. And then having regular weekly office hours calls where someone can attend to just have a casual conversation about Copilot. I tried this and it didn't work. Does anybody have any suggestions? Or this new feature's coming, or we just tried this and this changed. Sharing those kinds of things. And I do think you have to make someone responsible for the program, because change management, especially for this tool, is not going to be just something you do once or you do over a 4-month period. It will be an ongoing thing that needs to happen.
How is that different from change management in cloud, which should be cloud is evergreen, and Microsoft's very kind of rolling out features sometimes on a weekly basis?
Yeah.
So
maybe it's not that different. Actually, it's a good point. Yeah. We have found that those examples, sharing examples, really helps. And I think having some sort of a organizational memory around those, so you can go look them up, have some repository for help resources, what worked, that really helps people. And that person that's responsible for the program, you need to give them some sort of a regular activity to perform. Publish one new prompt a week to everybody, that kind of thing, and highlight it somehow. That's something that I think keeps it in people's mind, because it's easy to forget and to go back to our old ways of email and other things that's
true. If
it
doesn't work, I'll go to the thing that worked, even if I'm frustrated by it.
That's right. That's right.
Could we stay on data preparation for a bit?
Sure.
And so I'm and let's just assume I'm a person that wants to switch in Copilot in my organization, and potentially even in my enterprise. And enterprises have been around for a while. Sometimes there's 10, 20 years worth of institutional knowledge that we expect Copilot to be able to do something with, right? Including the ability with a well-structured prompt to read the HR information of every person in the business, because it hasn't been secured appropriately.
Correct.
Because it was secure, because it was obscure. How do we fix that now that we have to fix that?
So some of us have been beating that data governance, data protection drum, including you guys, for a very long time. And I think for us as practitioners, one thing that Copilot has done, it has elevated that conversation again. Everybody is suddenly concerned about it, right? A lot of things on the exhibit hall floor, a lot of sessions here about how to protect and govern your data once again, which is great to see. I think of it in 3 camps. The first is to assess your environment and see where you have gaps in data protection. And I specifically use the words data protection and security separately, because to me, that's two sets of controls. So the first one is assess your environment at a fairly technical level. In my session, I touched on two Microsoft solutions for doing that. The first thing I started with is understanding how does Copilot work with your information. And it's important. Yeah, this point is kind of obvious for some people, but I think it's still worth saying. Copilot runs under your user identity, right? So it has access to everything that you have access to.
That's right.
It's very much like the Delve effect, if people remember Delve, which is now no more.
Yeah.
Yes. And because it runs under your context, your user context, it has access to all the information you have access to. So all your documents, your emails, your chats, your contacts, your meetings, your connections between contacts, all of that it has access to. So understanding that, kind of elevates the conversation of, okay, let's examine what people actually have access to. There's two solutions that Microsoft provides to help to assess that. One is there's data access governance reports and SharePoint Advanced Management, which is part of the SharePoint Premium family. So those are good. They only give you site level information though. So I like to say that for small to medium sized businesses, those are useful. And what Microsoft announced here was that with any Copilot license, you now get access to all of the SAM features, all the SharePoint Advanced Management features. So you suddenly get access to that without having to buy SharePoint Advanced Management licenses, which is nice.
Nice.
But the information it brings back is only site level, right? So it'll tell you this site has this many files, 300 files with the everyone except external user permission. This site has 500 files labeled confidential. It doesn't tell you the actual files. It doesn't give you everything. The other solution that we look to where you are either in a very large enterprise environment or you need to get at that very granular data is Microsoft Graph Data Connect for SharePoint, or MGDC. And that tool is brilliant. That will give you everything. It literally will go extremely deep and give you, site information, file access information, permission information, group information on every single file in every single site across extremely large environments. Like think tens of thousands of sites, hundreds of millions of files. And it'll do that in a matter of hours to a couple of days, let's say, depending on how big your environment is, because those APIs are not throttled.
Yeah.
So I talked about those two solutions as ways to assess your environment. Then we assess your data security controls. And I use the language very specifically. When I say data security controls, it means all the stuff that we all implemented for clients to implement zero trust principles, right? So good identity hygiene in Entra ID, robust conditional access policies, multi-factor authentication, endpoint protection, Microsoft 365 threat protection, all of those, kind of fundamental things we should be doing anyway.
Yeah.
Because if I'm an attacker and I'm in your environment, I'm going to use your instance of Copilot to help me get to the good information quickly and exfiltrate that, as opposed to just trying to exfiltrate everything. Right? So that is an attack vector people need to think about. So those zero trust principles really need to be solid to prevent that. And at the same time, we go to the data protection controls. So things like sensitivity labeling, data loss prevention policies, insider risk policies, data lifecycle management, and access reviews. So assessing for those, deploying some of those capabilities depending on the maturity of your organization, and using all of that to prepare for using a tool like Copilot.
There's a lot there, and
wow. Sorry, lot to unpack there.
No, but it's fantastic, and I saw you made Nick really excited because you used the zero trust phrase, right? We do refer to him as zero trust Nick.
Yes.
So that's fantastic. I was going to ask you, and I think I know the answer to this, but to get your opinion here is, are you seeing the desire to deploy Copilot actually accelerating people actually getting on top of governance for data? So the data security things that you talked about with classification policies, retention policies, all of that stuff. Yeah. Is it the stick we've been looking for? Because we've been looking for a stick for a while.
Well, security hasn't been the stick. Right. We've been kind of preaching for a while that unless your data governance is, unless you have if a bad actor comes into your environment, they can see everything. Yeah. Now we don't have a bad actor. We could have too little governance, meaning that you unintentionally could see things that you shouldn't. And that is not just a privacy issue. That could threaten your actual job.
That's right. Yeah. So we do see it accelerating that conversation.
Yeah.
Absolutely. People wanting to now pay attention to these capabilities because they want to benefit from AI. Those conversations can be hard to navigate. So the other point I tried to make in my presentation earlier this week is that I usually advocate for a balance between data protection and productivity.
Okay.
Because we have had conversations with clients where we go in, we configure MGDC, we run it, we show, yeah, you've got all this oversharing, all this place. And it stops a Copilot project dead in its tracks.
Yeah.
And they want to clean all of that up before they deploy Copilot.
Yeah.
And cleaning that up can be a transformational change for an organization, which can take years.
Yeah.
And the problem that causes is you then take years before you benefit from any AI and lose a competitive edge potentially to your clients, right? Because your competitors, because your competitors are going to also be rolling out AI and trying to benefit from that and increase productivity and get better insights from their data. So you have to weigh that factor in. So we try to balance that a little bit. I kind of advocate for, while you're cleaning that up, figure out how you're going to roll out Copilot, who you're going to roll it out to, start doing a pilot of that in parallel to the data cleanup effort.
It's interesting that for the second time on this episode, we've hit on an emotional nerve.
Yeah.
Because now we're talking about benefits, right?
That's right.
And it's interesting that it appears impossible that even though we're trying to gain this cost benefit of AI, that the emotional aspect of rolling out AI appears to be a critical factor and navigating that. And how do you deal with that when every company has a different culture and the priorities from company to company can be radically different?
It's a great question. I don't know if I have a solid answer. It's amazing that with Copilot and AI, just in the last 2 years, because isn't it like 2 years this month that ChatGPT came out?
Yeah.
The imperative to deploy some AI solution is coming from the C-level.
That's right.
It's coming from the board. It's not from the bottom up. It's coming from the top being pushed down. And I think that's part of what causes it to be an emotional thing, because that board level or C-level doesn't always understand how it actually works and what's involved in it. They just know it's transformational. You know, everybody else is doing it. We feel we need to do it to gain a competitive advantage, and we need to talk about the fact that we're using AI.
Yes.
I think that nature makes it an emotional thing. Yes, there's benefits. Absolutely. Translating that from, you know, the chairman of the board telling you we need to roll out AI to everybody, to actually doing it in a safe way, there's a huge distance between those
and we
things.
also now, we tread back into this whole like stakeholder problem, right? Because you have productivity stakeholders who are looking at the benefits of something like Copilot can bring to the productivity of the workforce and to the business as a whole. Then you have the security stakeholders who are looking at this going, well, that thing is going to do what to all of our data? How's it going to consume the data? How's it going to use the data? What does that mean for us, right? And I, like you, have seen situations where the productivity folks, the business goes off and makes decisions and goes down a track, and then security catch up with them and go, hang on, like let's hold up for just a second here until we can figure out how we bring this in. So what are you seeing in terms of like what's working for customers that are actually doing this successfully? Is it those two stakeholders being married together in a meaningful way so that they can make those decisions together? Or is there a better way or a different way to approach?
Particularly in the enterprise.
Yeah.
So I think that those two sets of stakeholders, the business and security, both have to be in the trenches, figuring out how they're going to roll this out, because both are important aspects of it, right? Yes, you want the business benefit of AI, the productivity benefit, the competitive edge, all that. But you want to do it securely as well, because if you start breaching data, that can have a very, very detrimental effect to your organization. So I do think both need to be in the trenches. I think one way to look at it is, I don't know if I'm answering your question here, but what are the different roles that are going to benefit from AI and starting with those? And I don't think the roles are finance versus HR versus legal versus engineering. I think it's more managerial versus individual contributor.
Right.
Because when you do start to roll it out, people then want to report on, okay, what is the benefit that we're getting? What are the how are we measuring that?
Yeah.
And often that's measured in time savings.
Yes.
And you do find those different roles have different time savings from AI, right? You're not going to, I've heard some presentations where, this AI solution saved me 5 minutes on every document. That was really valuable for me. Okay, maybe. But it's hard to articulate that.
And that's not always, it's not always going to be as clear depending on which part of Copilot you're using, for example, right? So for example, I mean, I think it's, the use case of developers and GitHub Copilot is pretty easy to quantify because, developer costs X.
Oh, agreed.
Right. And if you're saving 10 minutes a day in a code related issue that now Copilot is handling, that's pretty easy to figure out the saving on that.
Absolutely.
But you're right. I think there are other folks like managerial staff perhaps or other individual contributor roles where the calculation isn't quite as linear. Right?
That's right.
Indeed. And I think it's also, for the sake of context on this episode, it's important to reflect that we're dealing with modern workplace.
That's right.
And we're talking about Copilot in the construct of M365 versus potentially, and if we're talking about our enterprise, it'll have to be a private instance of OpenAI in Azure that's secured appropriately so that we don't fling things open to an open SLM or LLM and, well, where did my company secrets go, right?
That's right.
And where's my structured data going that I would want to get some benefit from an AI point of view? I'm reflecting on engagement that I'm busy with where a very, very secure customer has asked us to help them modernize their governance as a data center bound organization, fantastically private. However, the pressure from the business and the board is coming down saying, this is tractors versus horses. We risk being irrelevant and we need to scale. So there's a directive, there's a commercial directive, and the board feels that unless an advantage is gained via AI-based technologies, that they will be a has-been or rapidly see their competitors overtake them and even lose customers.
Absolutely.
So that pressure is real.
It is very real. Absolutely. I do think this is also, like we said, this move to AI has reignited the governance conversation. It has also reignited the modernization. Exactly. The modernization conversation of getting away from maybe, and I don't know your customer, but hosting your own data center. Like there's there has been a lot of data center exits. And I think this is going to continue to happen because you're right. They aren't going to, they're not going to be able to keep up with their competitors because the actual, the actual delivery of the business itself, regardless of what business it is not always that complicated, right? There are lower and lower barriers to entry in many businesses to get into to do the actual business. But if you can deliver better customer service, you can deliver product to customer faster, you can make it simpler for a customer to buy or return things or exchange things, that has become valuable to the consumer or to, business or business to business transactions. So the cloud technology is making that much simpler to do all that. And if you're not on board, you're still doing things where, I don't know, delivering a product takes 72 hours, but your competitor's delivering it in 2.
It's true.
Those kinds of things make a big difference. So that cloud modernization conversation, I also think is getting big
I'd want to pull on that thread a little bit. And considering that we have customers who are still very much file center based or file server based in the data centers, file centers. And on the floor, I've bumped into a bunch of customers that said, the business will not get rid of file servers. And file servers are very much like paper where retrieval is fantastic, but search not so much, right?
Correct.
And the low-hanging fruit for SharePoint has always been, once something's in SharePoint, it's easy to find. We don't have to necessarily create that much ontology or taxonomy or even structure around things. However, now that we're getting into the data governance side of the house, all of a sudden we need to. So my unfair question to you, Antonio, is talk to those customers who've got on-premises file servers and they're willing to do something. They're willing to do the just enough to get that data into the cloud and do something to it to create structure so that they can gain benefit from Copilot, but they don't want to be embarking on a 2-year, 5-year data governance project because they need benefit now. And that now could be a quarter.
So a great question. We do recommend that people get off of file servers, that they move their data to the cloud.
Yes.
And the notion of, we've always avoided kind of lift and shift migrations, where you're just taking what's in the source and you're moving it to some new destination. In the past, traditionally, it was all about, take that opportunity to reorganize your data, create a new taxonomy, a new information architecture stored in. And yes, there's still value to do that. But we've also learned that people don't set metadata.
True.
They just don't. Moving to a new information architecture, I still think is important from an organization perspective. But we don't anymore go down the really complex metadata structure routes. We try to keep those things simple. We do so recommend cleaning up rot where you can, but there are ways now to do that in kind of a hybrid fashion where you're not taking 2 years to do it, but maybe you're taking 6 months or 3 months as part of the migration effort. Because you do need to get your data into the cloud to benefit, into the Microsoft 365 cloud, to benefit from Copilot for Microsoft 365. Otherwise, it has nothing to operate on. It can still search the internet, but so what? You could just use, Bing Chat or Microsoft Copilot in Bing for that.
It's true. And nice tools that they are.
Yeah.
But it's not an enterprise tool, and there's no enterprise privacy attached.
That's right. We also used to create these taxonomies to automate data governance processes, automatically assigning retention labels for records management, automatically assigning sensitivity labels. Those tools, the sensitivity labeling tools, the retention tools, they're evolving. There's lots of new automated capabilities within them. There's AI-based capabilities in them to recognize kinds of documents without having to go that metadata structure route. So I think it's worth investigating those and trying to leverage those as opposed to the strict taxonomies. And I still don't like lift and shift migrations. But I think it is becoming more about, okay, let's migrate what we can quickly. Let's do some cleanup. Let's archive some. Let's do a little bit of due diligence on what we're going to migrate because we really want to benefit from AI.
So how important to this whole thing is retention and data cleanup specifically, right? Because I think the same organization that's still running file servers has every single document that's ever been created in the history of the organization sitting on those file servers.
That's right.
How important is this? And is there a baseline that organizations should be looking at to say, hey, in order for us to be most efficient, we need 3 years or 5 years worth of data, and the rest of that stuff probably needs to go into some sort of cold storage?
Great question, Chris.
So I do think retention, records management, data lifecycle management is extremely important to a solution like Copilot being able to operate effectively, because have old data around, you're going to get answers based on old data.
And 27 versions of the same document.
Exactly. I also think there's another trend at play there. Organizations used to keep everything forever.
Yes.
Including the organization I work for. And that usually was an imperative from legal. We keep everything forever just in case. We have dramatically seen that change in the last 3-4 years, where legal teams are recognizing the risk of over-retaining data. Because it opens you up to additional litigation and discovery of content that you didn't need to have lying around.
If you don't have it, you can't provide it, right?
That's right. That's right. Now, I can't give a baseline timeline because that's very dependent on the organization and your record retention schedule.
Right.
We've also seen record retention schedules get modernized in recent years, right? Because those used to be based on paper records. They were around for 30 years. People tried to bring them over to the electronic record world, and it was just too hard to implement something that had, record retention schedule that had 2,000 record categories. Those are getting modernized and streamlined. People are going more to big bucket categories where it's like, okay, we're going to have 80 categories or 50 categories or maybe 150. Those ranges are much more reasonable for implementation. So we have seen that trend as well. So I think it's very important, records management. I think to do true records management, you have to get to the disposition stage. You have to get to actually deleting content. Or archiving it to cold storage.
Okay.
Right? Because until you actually delete, you get all the approvals to delete, and then you actually hit delete. You're still keeping everything forever. Right? And the key purpose of records management is to dispose of content according to our record retention schedule when we're allowed to delete stuff and have all the approvals for it as well. So yeah, from a Copilot standpoint, it's really important to be working off of relevant recent data.
Relevant recent data. I've heard that a number of times when it comes to my Copilot adoption. was less than pleasing because I couldn't find anything. We decided to switch it off. And we want to be really, as practitioners and trying to gain benefit out of the technology, which is, a few years ago, indistinguishable from magic.
Yes.
It does require some preparation, though.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's probably the largest takeaway from the show. And as we head towards the top of the hour, we've had, I think, some actionable insights from you, from which we're really, really grateful.
Hope so.
I'd like to ask you, are there any final thoughts that you want to leave our listeners with, as well as, is there anything that you would like to plug?
So, final thoughts. One thing we didn't talk about that I do want to leave folks with is, as you are rolling out Copilot, as you're planning that rollout, think about customization of Copilot and connections into other data sources, right? To bring in your structured data, bring in your CRM data, because we do find the context switching, like I'm working in Copilot now, I have to go to my CRM system, I have to go to my HR system, is that context switching can be very unproductive. And if you're able to access that data from Copilot, from one interface, whether it's through agents or Copilot Studio or connectors, being able to access all that data from one place is a really good use case. So, once you're rolling it out, think about planning how you're going to customize and what you're going to customize with. We heard a lot about agents here. So I would recommend people learn about agents. That was kind of a big announcement here at Ignite. In terms of plug, I would just plug the company I work for, Protiviti. So great company to work for. Global consulting firm, 27 offices in 90 countries, 11,000 consultants. So not massive, but we're not a tiny company either. And we like working in really big enterprise, Fortune 500 environments, but we also work with small, medium organizations too to help them get the benefit out of Microsoft technologies, Microsoft Cloud technologies, and Copilot. So shameless plug there.
And how can folks find you? Social media, conferences, things like that.
So great question. So I do like to connect on LinkedIn. So Antonio Maio on LinkedIn, work for Protiviti. I do have a blog, Antonio365.com.
Lovely.
I need to get a couple more articles out there, but I've got a couple of good recent ones. And then I myself, if you guys don't mind saying, I have a podcast as well with two other MVPs, M365voice.com.
Lovely.
Cool. Very nice.
Yeah.
We'll feature that in the show notes.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah. Is that audio? Is that YouTube? Is that all of the above?
It's all of the above. So there's a website, m365voice.com. It's available on Spotify, on iTunes, and YouTube.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
Very cool.
Closing thoughts from you, Chris?
No, look, just thank you for joining us again. Always great to talk to you. And I guess I want to check out your podcast. I didn't even know about that, so that's fantastic.
Yeah, it'd be great to have you guys on. It'd be great to have you guys on sometimes on ours as well.
Yeah, we'd love to.
So let's see if I can. I'll see if I can arrange that.
Lovely.
All right.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, and have a safe trip home.
Thank you. Always great to see you both. So glad we got a chance to connect in person here.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, guys.